All right, so by way of agenda, we're going to do some quick introductions to tell you who we are, Symptai Consulting. I'm hopeful that most of us on the webinar know who Symptai is. We're going to introduce our presenter. We're going to go through some information around threat actors, statistics, and patterns, which we really feel is important to you and will add context to the conversation. We'll talk about some cyber threats and mitigating risks in our organization. And then, of course, we'll talk about our cybersecurity services and leave some room to answer some questions. So now, guys, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A. That is that second icon at the bottom of your screen in the middle to put your questions in. So once we get to the end, it'll be much easier for us if you type those in the Q&A section. All right. So welcome. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So happy to see the numbers growing. I hope everyone on the call is doing well. We have you for an hour and we plan to use that time wisely. And we're hopeful to leave you with lots of information that you can use in your organization and in life. All right, so let me tell you about Symptai. Symptai is an organization that has been with you in the Caribbean for 24 years. We've had the privilege of serving over 340 customers in 20 countries. We are now at 60 full-time employees, 45% of which is female, which for the IT space is quite atypical. So we're very, very proud of that. We're also very proud of our values. So as an organization, we believe that it's important to live and work by specific values. And for us, that's candor, integrity, and curiosity, right? The heart of what we do is our people, and we're really fanatical about embracing that culture, the culture of showing up as your whole selves every single day. And we embody that, and it comes out in everything we do. In terms of how we serve the market, we're here to talk about cyber, and we are the leading cyber and information security firm in the Caribbean. It is a fact. We believe it to be so. We also focus in the areas of data privacy and protection, digital transformation. And at the heart of digital transformation is really helping companies mature from a technology and operational perspective. So wherever you are this morning as an organization, whether you consider yourself a small business or a mature organization, there is a scale and a journey involved with becoming the strategic version of yourself, right? The strategic vision that you have for yourselves and how you see yourselves in the future. There is a journey that has to be taken, and Symptai Consulting enjoys journeying along with our customers from wherever they are at to where they really want to be through the use of technology and operational efficiency. So that's who we are. I want to let you know who will be speaking to you this morning, and I won't rush through this. Oh, before I do that, I apologize. I thought it would be key just to let you know about our partnership with Symptai, and that is our most recent venture, which happened late last year. So even though we've been serving the Caribbean for a number of years, we have big dreams, right, of expanding and increasing our footprint and becoming more impactful in countries that we weren't before. And so the partnership with Digicel has opened up opportunities for us in 20 plus markets. We also had dreams and visions of becoming more efficient, of incorporating more structured and sound governance practices within our organization. And the partnership with Digicel helps us to do that. And of course, at the heart of what we do is our customers, and we want to be able to create a full experience for our customers, starting off with doing the assessments and reviews around where the gaps are, all the way through to providing solutions to make those things happen, right? And Digicel does partner well with us to do that. Now, in terms of our presenter, so Rory Banks has, thank you, Rory. He has over 10 years experience in information security and IT audit. He earned his MSc in cybersecurity from EC Council University, and he has a bachelor's in computing and information technology from our very own UTech in the Caribbean. There's a list of certifications here, which I feel is important to go through. He's certified Chief Information Security Officer, certified ethical hacker, computer hacking forensic investigator, EC Council certified analyst, certified network defender, and we're going to talk about defense in detail, certified information systems security professional, certified cloud security professional, certified information security manager, certified information systems auditor, and cybersecurity nexus is also an area he has certification in. Rory is very heavily involved in marketing and business development. He's very active in the development of young men and women in the cybersecurity space and the audit space as well. He has associations with different educational institutions, including UTech. He has mentorship programs that he continues to stay active with. And they're also very cool cybersecurity competitive and development programs that Rory has instigated. And he's also very active in certifying bodies. So it's just about being influential and impactful in the area of cybersecurity. And Rory has certainly done that. He's a special member of the Items Writer Group for renowned certifications, certified cloud security professional, computer hacking forensic investigator, certified network defender, and he has served on the ISACA Kingston chapter since 2017. So when he's not doing all of that, Rory really loves DIY home projects, constructions, and renovations, and he loves fast cars. He's also a husband and a father. So I'd like to just hand over to Rory now to walk us through the presentation, and I will be back with you at the end to facilitate your questions.
Thank you very much for the introduction, KJ. Haven't heard so much information about myself in a very long time. It's a great way to start there. All right, thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and hope you find our information and our presentation informative. I'm sure it will be helpful, and it will definitely open our eyes up to the world of cyber. So first of all, who is a hacker? So we have different options here on the table, A, B, C, D, E. And A seems like a coworker. B, typically we would associate B and E with someone that has malicious intent that you may think is a hacker. And then C, you have maybe a child, maybe a cousin, your niece, your nephew sitting around a computer. And D looks like someone that's at work, not happy. But in reality, a hacker can be anyone. There are various different threat actors, and all of the above are hackers in their own sense of mind. So nation states, employees can be a hacker. And remember, this can be from an intentional perspective or even unintentional, similar to children. You have children that most of the times they're around your computer or they're around your mobile device. And when they're around these devices, they want to play a game or they want to download something on it, right? If they download a malicious software on your device, then in technical terms, that's a type of attack or a hacking, because now your device will be compromised. But there are various different types of hackers and attackers out there. And of course, we as IT professionals are ethical hackers. So yes, we do hacking, but ensure you use the ethical part to it. So looking on some global statistics, and this was research done by Verizon Data Breach. This was a 2021 research. So even though the numbers looks pretty high here, this is still only a subset of what actually took place within the world. So here we're seeing that total of incidents versus breaches. So it's about 29,000 incidents that occurred versus 5,258 breaches. So there's a difference between incidents and breaches, where the incident could be a security incident, could be an item that has been identified. However, it does not necessarily mean that data has been breached or your system has been breached. So in these instances, what we have seen is that since 2020, versus 2021, there has been a 33% increase in the amount of breaches that have been identified. And that's a very high increase. So we're saying that we've seen more breaches occurring across the world. But what's also interesting to me is if you look on the industry based on the category, we see that the entertainment industry had identified 7,065 incidents. And most times when we think about the different industries, we don't even consider entertainment when we're looking at cybersecurity, but it's showing you how big entertainment industry is, and it's now becoming a very prime target for attackers. However, even though the entertainment industry had a high amount of incidents, they still only had 109 breaches. So the public sector still had the highest amount of breaches, which was around 885. So take the statistics in context, and if we look on the Caribbean, we'll see some more numbers there. So sticking to the breach patterns, and there are different types of breaches that happens around the world. However, one of the most prevalent breaches is regarding to social engineering. So in 2016, it was around 24, 26%, about 26% of social engineering activities that would have resulted in a breach. However, at the end of 2020, that skyrocketed to almost 40%. So social engineering still is the leading case of breaches around the world. And then in a close second, I would say is basic web applications. So almost every company has a website. We all utilize websites daily or a mobile app. And we're seeing that web application attacks are still pretty high, almost 30%. So some that we have seen that has declined is pertaining to like privilege misuse. So in 2016, it was roughly about 16%. However, in 2020, it's now under 10%. And that's good because it's always good when we have a decline in breaches, especially when we're looking on the pattern. And the good thing with privilege misuse is that we're getting more aware of access controls. So ensuring that persons do not have excessive access to a system. We're implementing two-factor authentication, ensure that only authorized persons have access to data. So these are some pretty interesting patterns when we're looking on the different breaches around the world. And denial of service it's still relatively small, but yet we're still seeing denial of service attempts in 2020, 2021, 2022. And what's also happening now is that they're tying denial of service with ransomware attacks. So almost all the different types of ransomware attacks, they're also tying it to a triage of different other attacks around the world. So now looking in the Caribbean, and this number is pretty high. So we have seen 289 million cyber attacks. And I'm just going to repeat that 289 million cyber attack attempts in 2021. So remember, attack doesn't mean that there is a breach, but this means that we have seen almost 300 million attempts of an attack within the Caribbean and the Latin America. And remember, these are automated attacks. These attacks happen when you're sleeping. It happens 24/7. If we bring up one of our threat map, you'll see the amount of attacks that are occurring literally every second. And this was an increase of more than 600% compared to 2020. So each year, the amount of cyber attacks is just increasing exponentially. And we accounted for 10% of the global threat within the world. So most times we say, yes, we're in the Caribbean and nobody's interested in a cyber attack within the Caribbean. But here we're seeing that it's an increase in terms of the target. So now we're taking up 10% of the global cyber threat. And I couldn't speak about cyber threat without speaking about one of the most recent security vulnerability, which was the Log4j vulnerability. And it was widely exploited. So it happened in December 2021. And since then, it has been exploited by a lot of attackers where they would execute malicious code on different vulnerable systems. And we have seen within our region that this has been utilizing this Log4j vulnerability as an attack means. So Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, it has been happening to us where we have seen these types of attacks being launched against us. And then there's some other types of attacks also, cryptocurrency mining, where they're utilizing botnets to try and identify ways of compromising computers and then mining it, meaning they take over your computer, they're using your processing power to now mine cryptocurrency, meaning they're using your computers when you think your computer is off or not doing anything, and they're getting money from it. And ransomware, it's still very common, it's still very high. We're going to be showing a quick demo of how easy it is that a ransomware can take over your mobile device. And phishing campaigns for sure. I can't stress phishing anymore because it's so simple for attackers to use social engineer to trick the human element into clicking a link or to downloading a software, submitting some sensitive information. And especially with COVID, They're now using that as a pretext. So they're using, hey, you want to get the latest COVID update, download this app, click this link, sign up to this webinar. So it's very common for persons to fall prey to these types of activities. So cyber attacks in 2021. So in every 39 seconds, there is about 2,400 times a day that we would see a cyber attack. And then more than 70% of attacks is pertaining to the human element. So again, speaking about social engineering, it's always the human factor, because yes, you can implement all of these technical controls. You can build out your data center. You can install 10 security applications on your computer. Yet, if the user decides to click on a link or to pick up a thumb drive, plug it in their machine, they're always the weakest link. So it's always important for us to train our staff members, train our employees, train our kids, our children, train our spouse. Everyone should be cyber conscious. Then 60% of companies that experience any type of phishing or social engineering attacks each year, most of the times, small businesses would go out of business. Then the average cost of a data breach, and this was in 2019 and 2020, was around $3.9 million. And this is US dollars that we're talking about. So remember, if you get a data breach, yes, your company is going to experience downtime, but there's also different acts, cybersecurity acts that may fine you. So for example, Jamaica Data Protection Acts, you have the GDPR. So these are different fines that also will come and press some fine on you to say that, hey, you didn't protect any data, you didn't protect our data. How did this happen? So there are a lot of fines going around pertaining to this. And each year you would see that the increase in spend in cybersecurity would go up. So around $133 billion last year, and we're anticipating closer to about 500 billion this year. So percentage of breaches that pertaining to compromised credential is about 63%. So lots of stats going around. But again, you see password weaknesses, social engineering, phishing exercises. These are ways that attackers tend to utilize different means to try and compromise a person, a company, or organization, or even their peers at times. So again, looking at the Caribbean within the world of security threats and analytics. So here we have some stats, and this was from Fortinet, where it showed us some of the attacks, and Trinidad was ranked #1, Jamaica #2, and Curacao #3 in terms of the top 3 countries with the highest number of IPS, which is intrusion prevention system threats. So this means that they would have detected attacks and they would have blocked the attacks. But looking on the numbers here, 1.8 million attacks against Trinidad. And this was detected. What about the amount that were not detected? Or out of that 1.8 million that were detected, how many actually made it through? Remember, it only takes one attempt that bypasses all of these controls for you to get compromised. And these are automated attacks. If you start thinking about physical attacks, attacks that's not taking into consideration any technology or any IT aspect, someone jumping a fence, going into a data center, these are some of the things that we do in some of our engagements. So these are different types of social engineering attacks, and it can cause harm to a company. It can cause downtime. It can cause revenue loss. And then botnets attack, Trinidad, Jamaica, and Curacao, same top 3 again. But Trinidad had the highest number of botnet attacks, 638,000. And with botnets attack, it's automated techniques that are just trying to gain access, trying to identify a weakness, trying to identify a loophole within a system. Meaning you're sleeping at nights and they have automated scans going on, just trying to identify some type of activity that they can gain access to within your system. It could be a remote desktop connection. It could be a weakness in a VPN. And these are all automated services. Then one of the common trends that we have seen since 2020, where cyber criminals are now attempting to identify weaknesses in your home router. Remember, majority of persons working from home, right? Traditionally, we would have all of the security controls within our office space. You have your routers, your firewalls, you have different layers of protection. But now, since you're working from home, you only have your home router. May not be a company or a commercial wide router. It may still have default credentials on it, may have default routing rules. It may have the firewall disabled on it. All of these are weaknesses that attackers would want to exploit. And remember, your router is your main point in terms of delivering internet connection to your home. So we've seen 20% of the organizations saw attacks orientated to the different types of routers. So the D-Link, Netgear, MikroTik, these are different brands of home routers. But these are routers that are in your home that may be set up with default credentials, may be using outdated encryption schemes, and these weaknesses can be exploited by attackers. Then we saw 20% of organizations identified Nmap script scanners. So later on in our presentation, Raji is going to be showing you how an attacker can use Nmap, which is a tool that attackers or even us as ethical hackers utilize to identify different technologies, different ports that are open on a computer and what is actually running on it. So this is typically one of the first steps in identify any type of weaknesses. And last year, we would have seen an increase in the amount of Microsoft Office exploits. So here we're still seeing vulnerabilities from 2017 still being utilized in 2022, and especially in the Caribbean. We have a lot of companies that have outdated Microsoft Outlook using 2010, 2013 versions. Even if you're migrating to the cloud, there's still versions or configurations that may be weak. So it doesn't mean that if you migrate to the cloud, you're all safe, because we have also seen an increase in attacks against cloud instances. So looking on some maturity indicators, and this was a very interesting survey and research that was done by IDB, where they would have performed this against all the different Caribbean countries. And here in 2016, they would have came up with a benchmark in terms of the different standards that would have been used. So I've taken out a subset. So I've only looked on D5, which focuses on security standards, organization, and technologies. But if you look on the maturity path in terms of in 2016, we're at a 1, and this is particularly to Barbados. So in 1 in standard and software development up until 2020, still at a 1. So we're not really moving up the ladder. But what was good is in terms of internet infrastructure resilience, we're at a 1 in 2016, but we have jumped significantly to a 3, meaning there has been an influx in technology. So what was prevalent in this is that we know that Barbados, you would have been looking into blockchain technology. You would have implemented that. You would have also been looking into using the digital payment network. So these are good avenues in terms of how you're trying to leverage technology. But remember that security has to be considered in all of these aspects. So yes, you may have a act in place or a computer crimes act, but still security needs to be considered right across the board. So even in technical security controls, we didn't have anything in 2016 pretty much, but in 2020 went up to a 2. And if we look on the other countries, so looking on Jamaica, similar story where we haven't really moved up the ranks in a lot of areas. So I'm not seeing any 3. However, there's a lot of 2s. And what was also interesting is pertaining to cryptographic controls. So when you look at encryption, 2016, we didn't have any controls in place around that. But now we're at a 2 where we're tending to increase in terms of ensuring that our web applications are secured using encryption schemes. Our services are using strong encryption. And when I show you our statistics from some of the findings that we have identified, you would also see that cryptographic controls are one of those weak areas that we have seen during our research and our reviews. Then looking at Trinidad and Tobago, they also have a 3 in terms of internet infrastructure resilience. However, that was the same from 2016 and the same in 2020. So are we saying that they haven't progressed as fast as they should? That's a very good question. In terms of software quality, we're seeing that we're at a 0 now, they're at a 2. Technical controls, they're at a 2. And one of the good things with all of these countries is that they have a C cert in place where they have a security team or a security unit that focuses on incident response within the country. So Trinidad has their TTC cert, Jamaica would have their J cert, and Barbados also has their program in place. So if we look into software development and software quality a little more, I want us to look on how often security is considered at the outset. So this was a review that was done, and in 2020 stated that 19% of companies did not involve cybersecurity team at the start of any new business or initiative. So that's 19%. It's always important to consider cybersecurity as early as possible. So in this example, they're creating web applications, they're creating systems. So you want to consider security from the initial stages of any planning or any activities. If you don't consider it, then there are some weaknesses that may happen. So it's going to cost you more further down you go in the life cycle. So it's 6 times cheaper when security is addressed at the design versus the implementation stage, and even 15 times more expensive when security issues are addressed during testing. And if it goes into production, then it's 30 times more costly because now you have users utilizing the system. It's a vulnerable application. Now you may have to take down that system and make some changes or some tweaks to it. So it will be costly further down in the life cycle. So it's very important that you consider testing as early as possible. So ensure that security experts, security researchers are involved in, even from the architecture perspective, from the strategy thinking. And if you do have systems in place already, ensure that it is still continuously tested. So some recent data breaches, and these are just some examples. So in this month, 2022, so Block confirms Cash App, and it was formerly known as Square. A lot of us would have known that application. It had a data breach, and the leak involved a previous employee where the employee would have had access to the data and they would have then leaked customers' names, brokerage account numbers, and other data pertaining to the customers. So that was a data breach that was pretty interesting. Then in March, there was about 2 different data breaches associated with Microsoft, and the Lapsus hacker group, which is very popular, had targeted Microsoft. They gained access to one of Microsoft cloud instances. So remember, you may think that just because you move to the cloud, everything is safe and secure. And we're looking at Microsoft, a multi-billion-dollar company and organization, experienced this breach where the Lapsus group gained access to one of the accounts that's associated with the Azure DevOps environment. So this is the Azure Cloud Development Environment. They logged into that space, took a screenshot, they pulled down source code about some systems, and then now they would have went about and they could have reproduced the same application, they could have sold it. And they did this twice in March. So they did it directly to Microsoft, and they did it to a company called Okta that would have been associated with it. So remember, if these huge companies are getting breached, what would be protecting us? We still have to consider security, and we need to consider it continuously. So looking in the Caribbean, and this is a research that we would have done from our Symptai Threat Intel team. So we would have seen that about 39% of security vulnerabilities that we would have identified were associated to some improperly configured devices and systems within the environment. This could have been weak passwords, default settings, default credentials. We're still going on engagement, seeing all of these default credentials protecting multi-million-dollar systems. And that makes it very easy for an attacker or a hacker to gain access. Then 15% pertaining to patch management, meaning systems are not properly updated or not properly patched. You don't have a patch management cycle in place. You don't update your systems, never. You just push out your laptop and that's it. I know some of our employees complain that, hey, my computer is updating too often, it's restarting. It's good because we need to ensure that we're properly patched and properly updated. And then looking back on insufficient cryptography, remember we saw in the IDB research that cryptography was one of those areas that would have increased in terms of us having controls in place. However, we're still seeing weaknesses pertaining to this. We're still seeing web applications deployed with no encryption, or if it is deployed with encryption, there are weak encryption schemes being used or weak encryption ciphers. So we would recommend using the most strong encryption cipher and also the strong encryption scheme to protect your data in transit at rest, meaning if you're logging into a system, you don't want the passwords to be sent in clear where an attacker can see the password and reuse it. That's as simple as possible. So some other common cyber threats that we have seen and data breach we have spoken about. So social engineering encompasses phishing, vishing, smishing, and also physical. So phishing talks about email compromise, trying to trick someone to click in on a link. Then you have vishing, using a phone call, calling persons. It's easy to relate to lot of scamming, but they call you, they pretend that, hey, you have won something, no, you need to log into this website or you need to send me this information. And similar to smishing, it's also related to social media attacks where they would send you a WhatsApp message, they may send you a social media, something on Instagram, but they're trying to trick you into getting some type of access to something. Then the traditional system hacking, this is still a common threat. However, attackers aren't really spending as much time to try and identify zero-day attacks or trying to identify vulnerabilities in system, because why go through all of that effort when I can simply send you an email and trick your user to click on a link? It's way easier, less time, but yet it is still happening. And password attacks, it is very common that we are still seeing weak passwords, or even if you are using strong passwords, if it is associated with a data breach, then you need to remove that password wherever you use it and reuse some stronger types of passwords, because we're seeing strong passwords still being compromised because they have been associated with a data breach in another company or another organization. And ransomware is very common, and I don't think ransomware will go away. So looking at some ransomwares detected within our region, and again, Latin America and the Caribbean, this was from Trend Micro. So WannaCry is still very common. WannaCry ransomware came out from 2017. 2017, that's what, 5 years now, and it is still prevalent within our space. We have been on engagements, we have seen the WannaCry malware that's sitting on machines. So it is still there. We're still seeing the attacks. And then the Sandecobe, well, we call it Revil, REVIL, Revil. So the Sandecobe is a company that actually offers ransomware as a service. So now instead of you trying to create ransomware, they can sell organizations or sell their clientele a ransomware that they can now leverage to attack a next organization. And one of the scary thing with this ransomware is that it's not only encrypting your data, but it's also selling your data. So it's taking a copy of your data and it's selling it. It's also disclosing your data. So if you don't want to pay the ransom, they say, okay, well, since you don't want to pay the ransom, we're now going to let you pay a data breach fine. So now they're disclosing that information, and that would have been your personal information, your sensitive information for your clients, for your customers. So now you're facing a fine and you're also without your data if you haven't had any proper backups in place. So these are some of the top ransomwares that we have seen within our region. So let's look on a ransomware. So we've spoken a bit about it, and this was an example of one of the ransomware that would have affected a computer. So this was one of the WannaDecrypt. So it's similar to the WannaCry. What would have happened? It would have compromised your computer. It would have brought up the screen, and then you would have been locked out of your information. But I'm going to show you a COVID app, and this is pretty simple in terms of how the ransomware gain access to the computer. So this is a mobile device. We're going to show you the specs on the mobile device. And what's going to happen is the person wants to get information about a COVID tracker app, right? So they want to know what's happening with COVID. So they went on the internet. Now they're going to download a COVID app. So this is called coronavirus tracker. Seems legitimate, even though it's not from the Play Store. That's a different story. And typically we just press next, 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 next. We don't even read what we're giving the app access to. But here it's asking access to phone book, to your phone, to make phone calls, to your photos, everything. And you see the app disappeared. So now the app is running in the background. User doesn't know what's happening. And literally in a few seconds, it's going to pop up and show you that you're locked out of your phone. So even if you try to close the app, so here it's telling you can't close it. And here is a screen that nobody wants to see. So congratulations, your phone has been hacked. Now you need to pay some Bitcoins to gain back access to your device. And as I said, we have been in instances where our clients would have been affected by ransomware. They would have called us, and one of the first thing, okay, what data was on it? What service has been impacted? Do you have any backups? These are some of the questions that we have to know. So even before we do any type of incident response, we have to know what type of initial controls you would have had in place. Then to identify the type of ransomware is our next whole step. So switching a bit from ransomware, we want to look on password attacks. So a lot of attacks outside of ransomware and social engineering is still pertaining to weak passwords or sometimes no passwords at all. So we have seen 54% of organizations do not use a password manager. So they still either write down passwords, try to remember the password. I know I can't remember so much passwords. So I use a password manager. We at Symptai, we do use a password manager and tend to use strong passwords. So let the password manager generate the passwords and do not reuse the same password across multiple sites. But a lot of companies still do not use a password manager. And 48% of organizations that do not have user verification in place for any services, meaning no two-factor authentication. If you're trying to reset your password, they don't have any type of checks that you have to do. And again, this is a means where an attacker can gain access to your information just by doing these things. So they gain access to your email, they set a reset password, and there's no other confirmation for them to now gain access to those systems. So look on some of these top 10 passwords used in SMB attacks, and that's server messaging block attacks. So this is a typical attack on the Windows environment where you have file shares and the system would be communicating in a specific type. And here you're seeing password 123 being used. Password as password ABC123, welcome as a password, password one. These are very weak passwords. These are some of the top passwords. I hope no one on this call or on this webinar has any of those passwords or use any of those passwords. What was surprising is that I didn't say admin as a password, because we have seen admin as a username, admin as a password. Then if we look on stronger passwords now, we're looking on 10 passwords that we're saying, okay, I need to have more than 12 characters long, right? These are strong passwords. However, we're still seeing that, yes, you're using 12 characters, but these are still weak passwords that would be identified during a brute force attack because they would have been previously compromised. They would have now been involved in a prior data leak or a data breach. And what attackers are doing is they're doing what's called password spraying. So they know all of these passwords, they have a big word list, and they would just send these passwords out and say, okay, I know your username as R.E. Banks. So let's try and guess your password. I know that these are some of the passwords that are associated with breaches. They're going to send that password. I remember they're not going 1, 2, 3, and then, okay, let me try next one. All of this is automated. So these are some of the weak, strong passwords, if you may say, that you shouldn't use. So remember, don't use like your login name as your password, your personal information as your password. So you don't want to have your first name or your last name in your password, your date of birth. Don't put those things in a password. Just use something that's very generic. Use a password manager to generate it. That's always the easiest way to go. and make it as strong as you can. Sometimes I've generated passwords that are 30 characters long, and the system can't even process the password because it's too long. So those are things that you also have to consider. So if you're testing the system, you don't want to break the system like that. So those are some of the checks that we do when we're testing applications to see how does it fail? Does it fail safe? So speaking about password, and this is a simple brute force simulation where an attacker is going to identify a router. So here there's identifying the router. And what they want to do is gain access to the router. So they know the username as admin. Now they're going to try and guess the password. So they're using a tool here called Hydra. And the L signifies admin as a username. And the capital P means they're sending a word list. So the word list would have thousands of passwords there. And then they're going to literally automate this process. And here, all right, you see how quickly it's going? So this is guessing the password, guessing the password. So it's not an attacker going 1, 2, 3 and just typing it one after the other. So this is automated, and even this is slow. So we do have tools that go faster than this. And if the processing power is stronger, here we've identified the password. So that's not a weak password. Capital A underscore C. So this is a complex password, but because we can automate this, or this password was associated with a dictionary attack or a word list that was previously compromised, attackers can now easily guess and gain access to systems just because of this. So here, admin, the password, now they're going to gain access to the system. And that's a simple brute force simulation of what can happen if you're using a simple password, or even if you're using a complex password, but if the password is associated with anything that has been breached before, then it can be easily guessed. So we have one more demo for you, and I'm going to hand over to Rajay. So Rajay Bitter, he's our team lead for the DevSecOps in Symptai, and he's going to walk us through a simulation of pretty much a website takeover. And this is, again, an easy way that an attacker can take over a website just by finding one simple weakness in terms of how the application processes a file that has been uploaded. Rajay?
Hello again, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Just gonna jump right into it. So as an attacker, the first thing that you're going to want to do is to get information about the system that you're trying to attack. A common way of doing this is using a tool called Nmap that Rory had mentioned earlier. This is a reconnaissance tool. What it does is it scans the target, tells us what ports are open, what services are running on that port. So, very first step, we run it. Now, scans usually take a while, so what we're going to do is just skip ahead a bit.
I remember one of the first stages is that you want to identify what's open on a system. So what ports are there, what services are running. Then if there's a vulnerable service, then an attacker may say, okay, let me find an exploit or a weakness that I can then identify and take control of that system.
So based on the results from Nmap, what we see here is two important things. We see that port 22 is open and port 80 is open. Now that's significant because right off the bat, you're going to know that if port 80 is open, then a web application is running. And so we'll continue on. Skip ahead a bit. Now, the next step we're going to do is, because a web application is running on the target, what we're going to do is try and find what directories or files are accessible on that web app. And DIRB, short for, well, somewhat, not really short for, but think of it as like directory, finding the different directories. So the different paths like /profile, /user, different things like that. So if you run it.
So it's simply just going to enumerate all the possible directories within this web application. So typically we'll go on a website and you would say, all right, let's go to /home, you click the home button, but in the URL, that's actually relating to a different page on the site. So we're just mapping out the web application to identify all the different paths that are possible on this website.
All right. So now that that's finished running, we can look through the results of it. So we see where we found 4 directories. You'll see one called CSS. That's not really going to be very interesting because that's usually where you keep your style sheets, you know. That's what renders the page and makes it look very presentable and pretty. Then we'll have the JS folder. We know that that's going to be your JavaScript files. That's the JavaScript files basically control how the front end of the application, the interface works. And then we see 2 interesting folders, panel and uploads. Now we have no idea what could possibly be in those. So we're going to try and browse to them to find out. So here we open up the Firefox browser. And we are going to browse to the panel folder first. Okay, so on the browse, what we see here is a section for a file upload. Now that's usually very attractive for an attacker because once you have been able to get your payload uploaded and executed, then from there, your imagination is limited. So what we're going to try and do now is craft a payload to actually upload.
So we've created a payload already, and we're just going to make some tweaks to it. You can continue already. So typically an attacker would utilize a payload to gain access to the system or try and exploit the system. So literally they would get all the information initially and then create a payload that would now exploit the vulnerability that we would have identified.
All right. And here you can see the payload, our shell php.php. Yeah. PHP, because this web application is a PHP site, so we try to use a payload that will be compatible with that. So here we try to upload it. But what we notice is we are met with an error message. Now, that tells us a couple of things. One of the main things it's going to tell you is that the server is doing some kind of check to prevent you from uploading PHP files. Now, this is going to, something like that is a common practice when you're working with a file upload section, because you know the developers are going to try their best to ensure that malicious files don't get uploaded. So now, in our head, because we're thinking, okay, maybe that file extension or file type is being blocked, what we're going to do is re-upload it. But in the process of re-uploading it, what we're going to do is use a web proxy. Quick background, the web proxy is used to intercept traffic going back and forth. So when the request to upload the file is intercepted, we see here where the file name is in request. So what we're going to try and do is change the file type. So we're going to change it from PHP to PHP5, which is a somewhat newer file type, which may not have been checked for by the application. So we're going to try it and see what happens.
So what we're presented here now is that the application actually has controls in place to detect malicious files that are being uploaded and also file types. So now the attacker is bypassing that check by just renaming the file type as Reggie just showed.
Okay. So here we'll have the green box. So that tells us, okay, our file was successfully uploaded. Now we need to try and figure out how to actually execute the file. So now thinking back, we remember that there was also a path called upload. So now let us try and go to that path to see what's there. So once we browse to it, what we notice is the file that we had previously uploaded is listed. Now, even though we have the file on the server, what we need to do now is to actually execute it. So that way our attack can take place. Now, oftentimes executing it can really be as simple as just opening it. So if you do something like clicking on it now, that will actually execute the file. But first, what we're going to do is a bit of setup. So we're going to walk through how we set up the file, well, part of how we set up the file. So first we have the IP address of our machine. So as the attacker, this is my laptop, this is my computer. Our IP address is 10.9.0.68. So then when we go back to the payload that we crafted, what we see here is the same IP address is listed in the file. And that is going to tell the payload that, okay, once you get executed, you're going to try and connect to this machine at this IP address through the port 1234. Now, what we're going to do is set up a listener on our machine. Now, what we use to do that is a tool called Netcat, and that's just going to open up our machine to specific connections on the port that we specify. So based on how we set up the script, we know we use the port 1234. So we're going to set our machine to listen for connections on the port 1234. Okay, so our listener is set up. Now we actually need to execute the file on the target so that the two machines will connect and create a session. So as I said before, executing it can really be as simple as clicking on it. So that's what we do here. We click, and then when we go back to our listener, we see where a session has been successfully connected, has successfully been created. So now we just need to test out the connection to see if it's actually working. So a quick test is we use ls. What that's going to do is list out the files and the folders on the server. And once we get our output, that confirms that, yes, our connection was indeed made. And from our machine in our apartment, office, or wherever, we have gained remote access to our target's machine. And then from here, an attacker would try and further the exploit by gaining administrator access or setting up more files to be able to perform different types of attacks and exploits. And that would be the end of the demo. So back over to you, Rory.
Thanks, Reggie. And everyone, I hope you see what really just happened, because initially it just seemed as if it was just a simple web application, only allowing you to do an upload, right? But this could also be a bank application. It could be a company's website, it could be a government web application. And a lot of our web applications that we see now allows us to upload files. It allows us to upload a picture. It allows us to upload some type of document that we have filled out. Especially since COVID, everyone is going online. It wants to take application. It wants us to have input into that application and to make things easier, right? So now, as a hacker, they're now going to try and exploit this weakness by identifying that there's a file upload. Yes, and Rajay would have shown that we identify the technology being used, PHP. We saw that, okay, we can upload a file, but it is blocking the file type because we use double extension. Then simply modify the file type. We already embedded something malicious in that file. And once it's on the server, it is then executed, and we can gain full access to the server. So The only thing that Rajay showed was that we did a directory listing, but really and truly, we could have done anything to that server. We could have deleted the server, we could have turned off the server, we could have copied the data. And this is what an attacker would do. So in instances like that, they would now launch a ransomware on that server, encrypt the data, take a copy of the data, sell the data on the dark web if they want, hold that ransom, communicate with you and say, okay, we now have access to your data, give us some Bitcoin. So this is how it can be done. Literally, that was 5 minutes, and it is that easy in some instances with some of the engagements that we're on. However, it can take hours, it can take months, it can take years, and all an attacker needs is just one time or one chance. So to just wrap things up in terms of some recommendation, spoke about strong passwords, minimum of 10, 12, 15, 20, I would say 30 characters long, as strong as possible. Mix it with uppercase, lowercase. We're also exploring passwordless applications. So that, again, we may have a whole webinar on that, where instead of using password, you may want to consider biometric or different types of ways to authenticate a user. Two-factor authentication is always good, so don't depend on a password only. Something you know, something you have. If it's a code, you can do that. Backups, keep your systems up to date, screen all suspicious emails, look out for phishing campaigns, ensure that all your security tools are enabled. It is being monitored. It is configured appropriately. Review the configuration, review the alerts, and ensure that you get tested. So in concluding, we all have a role to play in cybersecurity. Every single person. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're the janitor, if you're the CEO. It doesn't matter. Once you have access to a company's information, to a company's data, even if you have Wi-Fi access, you do have a role to play in cybersecurity. And the users or the end users are ultimately responsible for that. Because as I showed you, we can have all the technology in place, but if the end users do not practice good security, then they will be all at risk. And thank you all. Just going to hand back over to Cora Jane.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Rory, for that information. What we were hoping to do with this time together, and which is why we named it Strengthening, right? And building strength around our cyber systems, is we want to give you all the information you need so that you can properly mitigate those risks, right? Here we have some certifications. That's just all the things that we have invested in from a knowledge perspective at Symptai. But I want to skip over to the next 2 slides, because we do offer some cybersecurity services via vis-a-vis assessments, which you have here. Skip over to the next slide, Rory. And just as a thank you for participating in this webinar this morning, we are offering a 10% discount if you purchase this between now and June. So we have a couple of offerings here. You can simply email your request to sales@symptai.com and use the code that you see there in the circle. So depending on what territory that you are from, we did target Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad. However, if you are on the webinar and you are not from any of those islands, and I did see Sheldon, who I know is from St. Kitts, and some other persons, you can use any of the codes that you see there. We will do some cross checks. And we also, through our partnership with Digicel, are offering some discounts on their particular set of solutions. You can go to the next slide. I think it's there, Roy, for you to see. Salesinfo@digicelgroup.com is the email address. And we will send this to you along with some of the information around statistics, so you can have that to keep. So we're offering some discounts between now and June for Symptai and over the next 24 months for the Digicel solutions, because we want you to be more secure. We want your environment to feel more fortified, and we want to ensure that your security posture puts you in a good position to mitigate against some of those risks that Rory and Rajay took us through this morning. So we are upon the hour. We had one question that I didn't think was answered. So throughout the presentation, Marlon and team have been answering some questions in the chat. We haven't answered Sheldon's question, which is what role do GRC tools play in cybersecurity? And also, how often should a company conduct a penetration test? Oh, he has 3 questions. Are there any changes to your network that should automatically trigger a need to do a penetration test? So, and yes, so Bethune has said, excellent presentation, wonderful. So Sheldon, I do believe we are up on the hour, so we may have to send you those questions separately, but we're gonna take note of them and email our responses to you. And of course, you know, you have access to us, so we can always do a call to address these. So I don't wanna keep you longer than this, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. The goodie bag you see here is that PDF pack that we're gonna send to you for all who have participated this morning. Thank you so much for your time. We hope we have made this a very informative and insightful presentation. Have a good day, everybody, and thanks again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Keep safe.
Yes, and secure.